Good evening, everyone. What a great crowd, and we've got a really great crowd online tonight as well, as a lot of folks from the administration have joined online, and so we welcome them, as always, to this event. And this is the inaugural event in our new Off the Record series. And Off the Record is co-sponsored by the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Presidential Library and Museum. And this speaker series will bring Clinton White House alumni to Little Rock to offer never-before-heard stories about their time in the White House. We at the Clinton Presidential Library are thrilled to co-sponsor this series because while we have the papers and the emails and the audio-visual materials of the Clinton White House years, we know that the humans behind those records have lost stories to tell about the decisions expressed in those records. So we're thrilled about this series. And with every off-the-record visitor, we're going to create a new staff spotlight entry on our website that tells a little bit more about the staff member and their work, but also links to the records from our collections. And Jake, do you have that? You can go to this QR code to see Billy's staff spotlight and some of the and some other previous staffers who've been here for different events. And you'll also see some of the presidential schedules on which he worked and some of the new ways of doing scheduling in advance that he devised. You likely also saw our longtime archivist, Adam Bergfeld, outside when you came in, and he had some of these records to show. And so we're going to bring some of those records to these events. Billy Webster came to the White House as a White House fellow in just before the start of the Clinton administration. And before his White House fellowship, Billy was president of the largest franchisee of the Bojangles' famous chicken and biscuits restaurant chain. As a White House fellow, Webster served as chief of staff to Governor Richard Riley on the transition team as the presidentially appointed positions in the administration were selected. After Riley himself was selected as Secretary of Education, Billy continued to serve as his chief of staff. Then he returned to the White House as assistant to the president and director of scheduling and advance, and Stephanie Street's boss. After leaving the White House, Billy returned to his work as an entrepreneur and community servant. He has served on the boards of Converse College and Washington Lee University, the Board of Visitors of the MD Anderson Medical Center, and the Board of Directors for the Liberty Fellows. An avid Fisher person, Billy has also competed in over 120 marathons and ultramarathons, and he now lives in Greenville, South Carolina. And Billy is also, as you see on the table between them, he's also an author. And his thriller, Rocket's Red Glare, thank you, Stephanie, is his new work and will be available for purchase after tonight's conversation just outside the room. And of course, Billy's going to be glad to sign those books for you. In conversation tonight with Billy will be his White House colleague and the executive director of the Clinton Foundation. Please welcome Stephanie Street to get this inaugural Off the Record underway, and welcome Billy Webster.
Thank you, everyone, for braving the weather. I don't know what it's going to be doing. It looked like it was sprinkling a little when I walked over here, but we're really pleased you're with us for this inaugural series, the Off the Record series. Oh, what? My mic's not on? Oh.
Testing. Oh, now it is. Okay, well, I'm sure you all could hear me because I have a very loud voice. But we're excited to kick off this series with Billy Webster, who is a great friend, a fabulous colleague, and yes, he was my former boss in the White House. I also want to give a shout out to the iconic Sheila Bronfman, who is here, who was as you know, the founder and director of the Arkansas Travelers. This Off the Record series was actually Sheila's idea. So thank you, Sheila. This was great. I'm excited to do these and excited about the different types of folks that we'll be able to bring in and have conversations with. So Billy, I want to start by talking a little bit about your service in the Clinton administration, and then we'll go to the book, and then we'll just kind of weave around. I have a bunch of prepared questions, none of which I'll probably use, but this will definitely be fun for me. So before we launch into these, tell us a little bit about why now? Why did you write this book? And did anything in your experience working in the Clinton administration and the White House sort of inform this story?
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. Great crowd, wonderful venue. And when people refer to me as Stephanie's boss, that's just a lie. Stephanie's never had a boss.
It's like
Everybody who she classifies as her boss knows, as I do, that we all work for Stephanie, which is a great pleasure. I learned everything I know about scheduling in advance from Stephanie, and I'm her biggest fan. With respect to White House service in the book, I mean, I think anybody who works in the White House can't unsee and unlearn the things that you experience and are fortunate to live through. Many authors will tell you eloquently that their books are works of great creative impulse and all these wonderful things. My book was actually an exorcism.
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 What is that?
I had two life events that occurred, one very small and one rather large, which over time intertwined themselves in my brain, and I thought about them literally for 3 or 4 decades. My children finally said to me, "Dad, if you keep talking about this and don't write it down, we're leaving."
Oh.
So I decided to, there's Bob Nash. Hello, Bob.
Bob.
Rock star Bob. And I will elaborate later with respect to specific incidences in our White House experience together. But I just want to say a couple of words about those two events, because as I said, one was really small and one was quite large. The small one, some of you all may have heard about the National Outdoor Leadership School. It's called Knowles. It's in Lander, Wyoming, and it's sort of the premier place in the country where people go for wilderness skill training, outdoor education. And it takes place in the Wind River Range, which is the Rocky Mountains in central Wyoming. It's quite remote. The course is quite intense. And as a 21-year-old, I had come back from studying German Romantic poetry, which qualifies you to do a whole lot in the White House, at the University of Regensburg. And so I took a Knowles course, month-long. The last week, you were supposed to walk about 50 miles. They give you maps, no food, and there are no trails. You have to figure out how to get from point A to point B over the course of 5 to 7 days, and you don't eat. I got so lost on about the third day, had no idea where I was. I was about 10,000 feet in the back country, and I wandered into this meadow full of bleating sheep. I had no idea the Wind River Range, which actually has the 2 highest mountains in Wyoming. Some people think it's the Grand Tetons. It's not. Both of those are in the Wind River Range. It's, quite beautiful, quite remote, quite dangerous when the weather turns bad. But here's this flock of sheep, and in the middle was this guy sort of towering above the sheep, and he was, I was about from me to you, and he had weathered skin. I was 21. I had really no idea how old he might be, say 30s or 40s, dark complected, very black, raven colored hair. And he had the most beautiful green eyes I had ever seen in my life. And he had this aura about him and his sheep, that, you could just tell he was one of these people that you run across in life whose being just fills a space. Little did I know, because I figured he was going to tell me how to get unlost and get where I was going, he was a Basque herdsman. He did not speak a single word of English, including hello. But we sat down in the dirt, and he kind of figured out, he knew where we were, of course, because he was there with me, and he figured out where I needed to go. Make a long story short from this little vignette, I could never forget that guy. And I don't really know why, but every time I would go back to Wyoming or the Intermountain West, I would think about this man who spoke no English. I never saw him again. I'm satisfied very few people ever saw him again. The Basque herdsmen were persecuted under Franco. They immigrated to the United States, and they ran sheep and cattle in the backcountry in Wyoming. So that's sort of memory number one. Memory number two is more directly related to your question. Sorry, me for digressing. I landed in Washington, D.C. from Charlotte on September 11th, 2001 at 9:04 from Charlotte, as I said. It was quiet. The first plane had not yet hit the World Trade Center. But the airport was just eerie, but I was in a hurry. I was meeting some of our colleagues from the White House. I got in a cab. And I was headed north on Highway 110, which is also called the Richmond Highway. I was in front of the Pentagon at 9:36 as I watched a plane come from my left. I lived in Washington when we worked together and run along the Potomac every day. I knew the flight pattern intimately. I ran every day underneath the jet wash from the planes flying up the Potomac to land at Washington National. And this plane caught my attention just because it was in the wrong spot. And then it banked left. The rest of it, everybody knows. That plane hit the Pentagon. It killed 188 people and was the third of the three planes to hit iconic government or financial structures. My plane rocked up on two wheels. We ended up about the last car to go into Georgetown, and I was stranded in Washington for 4 days with F-15s flying up and down Pennsylvania Avenue. That is something you can't unsee or forget. And those two things, and I should say that event, as all of us know, changed our relationship with life. It changed the way we think about and interact with inside spaces. Airports, federal buildings, this building, shopping malls for the longest period of time. And in Europe, almost every major building you go into, it became a very different world that day. And we will remember because, Bill Clinton had only been out of office for 10 months.
Yeah.
That almost was part of our world. But we were all waiting for the next 9/11. We knew Osama bin Laden was planning it, and we all wondered what it was. So the premise of my book, and I'll finally finish answering your question, Stephanie, is what would that second event look like? What would a 9/11 terrorist attack look like that closed off our wide open spaces from us? Last year, 335 million people visited the national parks. What would it take for that number to be zero so that none of us could go to Glacier or Yellowstone or the Grand Canyon or Acadia?
Or Hot Springs.
Or Hot Springs. And so the book is about that terrorist event over the week of the 4th of July. And of course, the hero who sort of saves the day is that Basque herdsman from my 21-year-old once meeting in the Wind River Range. He becomes a half Basque, half Native American, ex-Marine Corps sniper who is now a deputy police officer on the Wind River Indian Reservation. And so that's the book. And how government service informs it, everything that we saw, our interactions with the Secret Service, the Presidential Protective Division, how interagency jurisdiction stuff worked or didn't work, all those things are in the book. And the people we worked with are in the book by different names. Leon's in the book. You're kind of in the book. It's full of little bits and chunks of our world together, Stephanie. But those are the two events that form the plot line of the book.
Thank you, Billy.
Sorry, that was a real long
No, but that
answer
was
to a
super
very
helpful.
short question.
So you were talking about iconic individuals. You just mentioned a few, Leon Panetta and others. I noticed that both Erskine Bowles, a former colleague, dear friend, mentor, provided a quote for your book, as did George Stephanopoulos, who I think most people recognize that name and know who George is. How did you pick those two folks to write in your book?
Well, you answered the question on George. I picked George because everybody knows who George is, right? He's this handsome guy running around on ABC TV, and everybody watches him, and everybody knows George. I picked Erskine because I wanted, and I couldn't pick Leon because of his subsequent jobs at the CIA and so forth. But and he was, if any of y'all are watching, there's a new documentary out about Osama bin Laden. It's in 3 parts. Just came out. It is extraordinary. And Leon features heavily in that. But I wanted one of the chiefs of staff because as Stephanie and I learned, maybe you knew, I didn't, but I learned just how difficult protecting the president and the White House is. We take it for granted every day that the first family is going to wake up alive. And as time has gone on, that has become a more difficult proposition for the Secret Service, as Bob Nash knows well. The advent of drone technology, which is a big part of the book, has made protecting anything difficult. If you just read the paper the last 2 days, Ukraine's asymmetric drone attack on Russia may be the most important war event of the last decade. It has changed the way wars are going to be fought. And think about, just take one example. There's a drone now that can fit in a tennis ball can. They're generically referred to as kamikaze drones. This particular one is called a Switchblade. Fits in a tennis ball can. It has the accuracy of me to Stephanie over about a 10-mile range, and it flies 160 miles an hour.
Wow.
So somebody with a kamikaze drone, the Switchblade, can be pick a spot in Washington, roll down the window on the other side of the reflecting pool and hit a target within 45 seconds. And so from the time we interacted with the Secret Service every day. Every event that we did outside the White House
and inside too,
and inside too,
every event, literally.
And I don't know if you remember the specific incidents to Dr. Barth's inside baseball stories. We had an event in Des Moines, Iowa, very much like the Butler, Pennsylvania situation with then candidate, now President Trump.
Was it the steak fry?
Yeah, exactly. So, Des Moines is, in general, flat as a pancake. And we at that time, the scheduling and advance staff and the communication staff, we were always about the photograph that was going to come out of any event.
The message, really focused on what it's going to look like on the TV.
There were no iPhones. There were just photographers. And they would be positioned to the side, and we would try to decide what that photograph was going to look like. And our job was to make sure it was a good photograph. We were kind of in the production business. The Secret Service does not care what that photograph looks like. They want the president to be protected. And so we met with, at the time, Lou Merletti, who is the special agent in charge of the Presidential Protective Division. And Lou goes, "We're not doing this event there." And, he's talking to, Steph, how old were you then? 28 years old?
What year was this?
94
Probably
4 or 5?
Oh, I was like 26 or 27.
Everybody was 26. You got all these kids running around. They don't care about they want
we
the shot
cared,
of
but we also, we cared.
And so we went through all of this rigmarole, but we're not going to move it, says we. We're
Pushback. We're
you're
always
moving
push
it, says they. So what we ended up doing is, we brought in big truck containers to interrupt sort of the 1,000-yard rifle shot that somebody could have executed at the time. And that gave rise to one of the most interesting events that I think you and I experienced together. I went to Lou and I said, look, my set, I was 32, a really old guy, about Bob's age at the time. And I said, all us kids, we got to understand more about how this works. I need you to teach us what you worry about, how you worry about it, and how you need us to help you make sure that nothing bad happens to Bill Clinton and the first family. So we took our staff to the PPD, Presidential Protective Division,
Beltsville, Maryland.
Beltsville, Maryland Training Center. And they showed us all the stuff that they do. We watched the motorcade being blown up. We watched all kind of they blew it up in front of us.
Right, these were simulations.
We
were like characters in the simulation. It was like a real live exercise that you see, they do, the hospitals and other things do. We did a real live exercise so they could see it.
And it was absolutely fascinating. And for me, it was incredibly, it changed the way I thought about our job. Because I now had to be an advocate for both production value as well as protectability. And I think it made us better.
Right. There's always going to be that inherent tension.
Right.
But at the end of the day, we always came to some kind of agreement.
Right.
Yeah. I want to ask you, you mentioned the national parks a minute ago. And in this book, there's a series of murders that all are taking place at national parks. Why did you choose national parks as sort of that venue? Or what's the relationship for that in this book? And
that's.
I don't want to screw up.
No.
Like,
I'm
is that going to
answer it so I don't ruin the plot line.
Okay, good.
But there's part of us as Americans that is intimately related to our outdoor spaces. 335 million people a year go to the parks and our federal lands. That's as many people as live in the United States. Over the weekend of the 4th of July, 16 million people will go to the parks. And it's so much a part of who we are. And has anybody in here never been to a national park? I usually don't get anybody raising a hand.
We have one right in our backyard, 45 minutes from here. Yeah.
Everybody goes. It's
and
just
our school.
What we do, and it's a homogenous, it's a heterogeneous experience. The people in those parks are from every walk of life, every income level, every race, and every country around the world. It is unique. If you talk to people from other countries, they will say how unusual our relationship with those spaces is. And I've, my whole life, thanks to my parents and just my kind of innate interest, I've been not only going to the parks, but going deep into the parks, into the backcountry, and I love them. It's where I go when I need to sort of rekindle myself. And I really, because of that 9/11 experience, started to think about, what if somebody took that away from us? When I was a kid, we would drive into the parking lot at Greenville-Spartanburg Airport 9 minutes before our plane would take off.
Yeah.
You'd rip your
Very
suitcase.
similar to Little Rock at that era.
You'd rip your suitcase out of the trunk and you'd just run onto the airplane. Mm-hmm. There was no TSA or Clear or magnetometer or, it was just kind of easy and it was great. And 9/11 took that away from us. We forget, I often forget, my children obviously don't know what life was like then. So I wanted to write about what would happen if somebody took that away from us. We know now, and you'll particularly appreciate this if you watch that Osama bin Laden documentary, we know now that they were planning a series of attacks across those kinds of spaces. I did not know that when I wrote the book. And I don't know how many of you all are paying attention to this, but this administration has decimated the staff in most of these parks. If you go to Yellowstone over the 4th of July this year, you better get ready, because you're going to be in your car for hours and hours and hours. There's certain places you're not going to be able to go. Half of Yosemite is off limits now. And so it's a little bit of a taste of what it would be like if we could not go to those places. And so, that was, those are not only places that I love and love to go, and all of you all love to go, but I had thought about since September 11th what it would be like if we couldn't do that anymore.
That's interesting. In developing such a fast-paced thriller, did you sort of make it up as you went along, or did you always know, did you have in your mind sort of like what's going to come next or how you lead into that? Sort of talk a little bit about your process of writing a fast-paced mystery thriller, since this is obviously your first.
Yes, and I will confess right up front, I am neither an author nor a creative person.
Obviously you are.
I had this stuff in my head. I had to get it out, and somebody said, write in a straight line. You keep writing. You don't try to fix the chapter before or the page before. But what really happens is I wanted to go that way, and by the time I finished, I was over there just because it made better sense. I had a great time writing the book because I'd been thinking about it for so long. The process for me was really, I use the word exorcism loosely and cavalierly, but that's kind of what it was. I needed to get that out of my brain in a way that was entertaining. By the way, there's the first rule of writing a thriller is don't kill a dog. So in my first draft, there were 2 dogs. One dog didn't make it to the end. And the publisher goes, son, take that out right now. and not to be sexist about his comment, he said, women, if you kill a dog, a woman will put the book down and never pick it up again. I said, all right, dog's coming out.
Unless you're Christy Nome.
Unless you're...
Sorry.
Exactly.
A gratuitous comment, sorry.
Touche. So the actual co-protagonist is an Australian shepherd named Peak. Peak is actually my dog, although my dog is not an Australian shepherd. Her character is in this dog, and it was such a joy to write about.
And talk a little bit about, you're going to have to pronounce the last name, Sage, the main character.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that character development and any other sort of insight about that character. Does that person have sort of, were you modeled after that, or that person, were there parts of yourself that you modeled into that character?
No, Stephanie, my recollection as that 21-year-old guy looking at the Basque herdsmen in that field, we never exchanged a word.
Yeah.
And Sage Mendiluze, that's the name of the Basque protagonist, the hero of the book. Mendiluze in Basque means long mountain.
Oh.
The Wind Rivers are a very long part of the Intermountain West and in Wyoming. And he was quiet but really authoritative. And I started to build a character that was intuitive, but not a Jack Reacher, or, for those of you all who read C.J. Box, whom I love, Chuck Box is a friend of mine. He's more like Joe Pickett than he is about Jack Reacher, but Jack Reacher's if you talk to people about why they like Jack Reacher, other than the fact he's strong as an ox and the rest of it, he's intuitive. He knows things from his training that lead him places that other, whether they're FBI people or sheriffs or policemen or whatever, don't think to go. So I wanted a different kind of character that was more gentle, intuitive, but really, really tough. I mean, for those of you all who know anything about life on a reservation, it's brutal. The Wind River Indian Reservation in Wyoming is 2.2 million acres. It's the size of Delaware and Rhode Island put together. There are 7 policemen on the Wind River Indian Reservation. It is a desperately poor, difficult life. And so his toughness, what he learns there, both from the richness of his culture, this is the Eastern Shoshone tribe. Those of you all who've read Undaunted Courage will know that Sacagawea was an Eastern Shoshone adoptee. That was not her native clan, but she ended up on the Wind River Indian Reservation. In fact, she's buried there. And so I was trying to create sort of a mosaic of, the cultural richness of the Native American tradition, the Basque aloofness, and attention to detail in the outdoors with kind of a guy who was trained as a Marine Corps sniper. In the sequel, which I've written, if you all buy enough books, maybe the publisher will
That was my
buy
next question. You're answering it for me. What's next for this for Sage?
The second book is much more full about him and his background and his female interest that is introduced into things. So, second book.
And have you ever thought, you said you've thought a lot about this person that you met and this life sort of changing event. Do you think that you'll ever try to seek him out, or have you tried to seek him out, or?
I'm fully satisfied he's gone.
Okay.
The average age of the Basque herdsman is late 40s.
Okay.
They're in the backcountry 7 months a year with sheep. Their diet is bad. They're subject to all of the diseases that rifle through herds of animals, and people die all the time up there of exposure.
Sure.
Lightning strikes, hypothermia, all that kind of stuff. So the one thing I will say about the Basque culture in that little bit of the Intermountain West between southern Montana through central Wyoming, if you're ever driving through there and you want the best food in town, find the Basque restaurant. Every town has one, and the food is incredible. But they rarely advertise. There's always something. You just got to find it.
Okay. Note to self, everybody here. All right, now we're going to transition a little bit more to these little off-the-record type stories. And are there any press here? So this really will be off the record then, okay? What's said in this room stays in this room. Do we all have that agreement? Is that, okay, so we can...
What happens in Little Rock.
I'll talk freely here. So can you tell us, Billy, a little bit about the first time you met, how did you meet President Clinton? And talk a little bit about how you became involved in sort of the Clinton, what do we call ourselves, the Clinton clique?
So it's actually, this is a good story, and I think I've told it to you before maybe, but some of you all, Bob will certainly know, because I think you've been to Renaissance Weekend, right? Mm-hmm. Phil Lader, who's going to be on remote later, ended up as ambassador to the United Kingdom, where my friend and classmate Warren Stevens is now. Renaissance Weekend is a gathering of people from all walks of life over the New Year's holiday. And without going into what it is and how it works, Phil Later, who started it, he and his wife Linda, put me in charge of the morning run. I think I was the only person Phil knew that actually had a pair of running shoes at the time. So I'm in charge of the morning run. And one of the early years of Renaissance, uncharacteristically at Hilton Head, South Carolina, which was the location of all of them, it was 27 degrees and sleeting.
Wow.
The wind was blowing about 15 miles an hour. The morning run's supposed to be at 6:30. It's half dark. It's just miserable. And, I'm hanging around out there on the beach, praying to God nobody shows up so I can go back inside. And I'm just about, this should have told me something. At 6:40, I'm going to give everybody 10 minutes. Nobody's here. I'm leaving. 6:40, 10 minutes late. We should have known.
That's early, especially at 6:40. I'm kind of shocked here.
This guy, who I'd never seen before, comes pattering up the beach and said, "Okay, let's run." So I said, "Oh God, I don't know who you are, but why did you come here?" So we run, 22 and a half minute, 45-minute run, 22 and a half minutes in one direction and 22 and a half minutes back. This guy asked me every question about myself imaginable. What did I do? Do I have siblings? When I told him I was in the fried chicken business, man, he lit up like a Christmas tree.
Because we had a Bojangles downtown. Remember, we had Bojangles right downtown where sort of like Chick-fil-A is now.
Well, we talked about chicken a lot.
I love Bojangles.
And so we get back. I'm frozen. My hands are white. But I had it's just really, when somebody asks you about yourself for all that long, it's kind of fun. So we get back and we separate, and I went, "Oh, I'm so sorry.
I didn't catch your name.
I'm Billy Webster. Who are you?" And he goes, "I'm Bill Clinton. I'm the governor of Arkansas." And I went, "Oh, God." So we began a friendship on that day, and my governor, Dick Riley, who ended up as Bill's Secretary of Education, and he were very close friends, and Governor Clinton was getting ready to run for re-election, and Dick Riley said to me, he goes, "You need to go help him raise money." And I did. And, one thing led to another, and here we are.
And here we are. So remind us like the progression. When were you a White House fellow? And then how did the then Department of Education, then to the White House, was that your path or?
Yeah, so that was probably 1980.
Right, so there was time in between. You navigated the public sector and the private sector.
I was in the fried chicken business, then we sold it.
So how did you do that and then going in and out of all these jobs? These very important
as I tell my
jobs.
children, if you plan your life, it ain't gonna work out that way. So it's all just serendipity, like meeting Bill Clinton on the beach. Most everything that's ever happened to me is because somebody I met helped me do something that was fully unexpected. And when my children seem aimless and they can't figure out what it is they want to do, I just said, you got to keep hanging around the hoop and paying attention to people who are successful and who want to help you, and you will figure this out. But yeah, it was, sort of the weaving in and out was all unplanned.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about a more somber date that I remember, and we talked about when you were here a few months ago, the Oklahoma City bombing, which was sort of our version of, I don't want to compare the two, but that was like the trauma, the biggest sort of event that rocked our world and rocked our administration. And obviously, President Clinton rose to the occasion. Can you tell us a little bit from your perspective? I don't know if some of you all were at the 9/11, at the program we did on Oklahoma City, but you had to remind me what was happening that day when we were talking about trying to figure out what was happening in the White House, because I had conflated the Branch Davidian compound and that because they happened so closely together and they were connected. Talk a little bit about your recollection from that day and sort of how we dealt with the scheduling challenges, et cetera.
Well, it was a memorable week because it was the few days after Easter, and my probably most memorable role in the White House was that I was the Easter bunny in the bunny suit for the Easter egg roll every year, because the bunny suit's hot, and they had to have a skinny kid in the bunny suit. So Easter Sunday, what day of the week was the bombing? Was it Monday?
It was a Monday, I think, because the Easter egg roll is always the Monday after Easter.
Right.
I can't remember. Someone will have to Google. Gavin, can you Google?
We had a staff meeting. That's right, because we had delayed it a day or two because of the Easter stuff. Mm-hmm. We were at our staff meeting at 9 o'clock, and sort of the substantive responsibility was divided between Stephanie and her colleague, Ann Wally. Ann Wally was in charge of all of the things on the schedule that were way out there. Stephanie was in charge of everything right now. Stephanie's really good at right now. And so we're almost finished, and again, it sounds primitive, but there was no, you couldn't just tell your printer we had to send it into the White House.
Print
we were
shop.
in the old executive office building, and we had just finished, and Stephanie was sitting on that side of the room, and the television was in the corner on that side of the room. I was in the middle, and I saw Stephanie just staring at the television, and it was the Murrah building in Oklahoma City with just its front completely blown off. And everybody is just, it was, as you said, the actual first event of terrorism in our life with Clinton was the World Trade Center.
Right.
This was a couple of years later, but this was of a different magnitude, it seemed, at the time. And Stephanie stood up and tore the schedule in half for the week. We kind of worked a week out and said, we have to start over. And she and I went over to the Oval Office, and I can't remember exactly, a lot was going on at that moment over there, but we had to tell everybody, a week's worth of stuff that the president's going to do is a lot of...
We had to dole it out to VP.
Cabinet secretaries and everybody else, and we just cleaned the president's schedule off for a couple weeks to see how that was going to unwind and what his responsibilities were going to be. And I have to say, it was a seminal moment for Bill Clinton. Mm-hmm. He was at his absolute best as the nation's first healer. And I've never been more proud to work for anybody than I was to work for Bill Clinton that week, because he was really, really good for us as Americans that week.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the more lighthearted, fun moments now in the White House. Can you tell us, and there's so many, because people ask me this question all the time, and it's hard to pick one thing, but I'm going to ask you, can you pick or share one of your favorite memories from your time in the White House?
Yes, I can. Other than being the Easter Bunny.
I've never seen that in your bio. I think that's a big, you need to put that...
Well, there are more pictures of me in that darn bunny suit than there are of me in the cabinet room doing the schedule. This was my most unfair. So I started sort of the end of Erskine Bowles and I started on the same day. I'd been there. I didn't even know where my office was. I definitely didn't know where the bathroom was. Clinton calls me in and goes, "We're going to the Middle East in a week. I'm going to Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Kuwait, Israel, and Saudi Arabia in a week." And I didn't know anything about my job. I mean, I'd met Stephanie, and so I ran crying over to Stephanie's office. I said, "What the hell? What do I do?" And I was introduced. We were talking about this in the hall earlier. I was introduced at that moment to one of the things that is essential to be a success, certainly in business, but also politics, which is having the right people in the right places and delegating to those people. We had a cadre of folk called lead advance people, and they, Bob knew a lot of them. These were folks who were, one of them was a law professor at the University of Wisconsin. One of them was a marketing and advertising executive in Chicago. What did Paige Reif do? I can't remember what he did for a living.
I can't remember either. He may be on the call, but like all of these people were seasoned professionals. That
they had other jobs.
They have other jobs, but we would call them in for big things like this.
And you would say, Paige, I need you to be in Damascus tomorrow morning. And they go, okay. And they'd hop on a plane. But we had, from the time I walked out of the Oval Office, within 36 hours, we had 1,300 people on airplanes headed to the Middle East. It's Secret Service, it's White House communications, it's food, it's ops.
It's everything. The National Security Council. Everything.
And, you can't mess those trips up. This is a no mistake deal. And you have to trust those people implicitly. And I don't know that they ever made a mistake. These guys and women were incredible, and they would drop anything. We told Brady Williamson, who passed away this year. I called Brady up and I said, "Brady, I need you to be in Uzbekistan tomorrow." I didn't even know where that was. I didn't even have time to, you didn't have an iPhone. You couldn't look. You couldn't say look it up.
Right.
You had to go get the atlas in the library. And so we, Brady's on a plane to Uzbekistan, never says, well, gee, I got exams tomorrow. I got to get out. They just go. And it was extraordinary.
It was extraordinary. You can imagine the presidential travel and how intense it is. We only had like 4 or 5 people in the White House who their job was to do White House advance. And especially with President Clinton and Secretary Clinton and, Vice President Gore and Tipper Gore, they were always doing things. So even in-town events, anytime they stepped out of the White House, even for a morning run, there had to be an advance person. So to Billy's point, the 5 permanent people, we had people on-call people in all the agencies. We had people all over the country. And again, there was this group of what we called dinosaurs. Some of the folks you were just mentioned that we called for these big events to supplement the 5 people that were the permanent advance people.
Your comment does remind me of what I did like the best. One perk of my job, because at that time I was a competitive athlete, even when I worked in the White House, I would get to invite whoever I wanted to run with the president. And kind of whoever I wanted, but I started, I would get the winners of the Boston Marathon. Mm-hmm. They would come 2 days later, or the New York Marathon, or, the Olympics. Had Greg LeMond, all these people that I had always revered and would have given anything. I just call them up and say, you want to run with the president? Oh, yeah, I'll be there in the morning. It was so great. And I would get to go, and sometimes I'd run and
get your party pick with the two of them.
Yeah. But that was great fun.
That was great fun. On a similar note, not a lot of people knew about the president has a box at the Kennedy Center, but I learned that from the first week I was there. So, and I made sure that was a well-kept secret. So kind of like you inviting your friends to go running, I invited my friends to go sit with me in the presidential box at the Kennedy Center for the first 2 years on a weekly basis until that kind of got out. But anyway, I'm exaggerating a tiny bit, not much. Talk about, besides obviously 9/11 and this trip you just talked about, your very first day, go figure this out, Billy. Are there any other, the most stressful day, or can you remember a time that you just are oh, I can't believe that this happened, or some other you always figure it out because that's what we do in scheduling in advance. We always, we don't take no for an answer. We always fix it. But is there any specific thing that you remember just wow?
I bet my things are the same as your things. I mean, I was not used to disappointing a principal. And Clinton had a temper, you know that.
Oui.
And he would feel free to scream at me.
Talk in a loud voice, not scream. He got very.
This is screaming.
He was very passionate about his job as president.
Well, look, I mean, not only was he young and energetic, but no president wants to be told what to do by some kid.
By a 31-year-old and a 26-year-old.
Right. So the picture that'll come up over there in a minute of you'll see a big calendar in the cabinet room.
Oh,
It got to the point where when we had to explain the president's schedule to him, I would borrow the Secret Service Kevlar vest and wear it into the room just to make him laugh.
You get used to it.
Yeah. You see the calendar right there? I've got a Kevlar vest under my shirt, and he's grinning because he knows it.
Right. I had already been seasoned to getting yelled at, so I wasn't quite as traumatized as you were.
Yeah, I really took it personally. I mean, it made me physically sick.
It does at first, but 8 years of it, you just kind of...
Yeah, see, I don't know how you did that. There's no way I could have done that.
You know why? Because you never take it personally. You know that this person has the most stressful job in the entire world, and I sort of took it as not a badge of honor, but that you could be there. They felt comfortable letting you absorb some of this, and I had to tell you learned lovely deflection techniques, like, oh my God, your tie, the color of that tie in your eyes, whoa!
Thank you for telling me this now.
I had a whole bag of tricks, but
so
it is very stressful.
One quick one here, which wasn't the president getting mad at me, but it was darn close. It's a serious thing and it's a funny thing. So when Gore and Clinton, before they got elected, they made a deal with each other that, you laugh. It's not funny.
Trust me, again, 8 years. Yes, I know.
That the vice president was going to have breakfast with the president every Wednesday.
It was lunch.
Was it
lunch? Yeah. Bill Clinton doesn't do breakfast. That's
sacrosanct. Every Wednesday, lunch. And so Clinton calls me in one day and he goes, you know what? I'm really getting sick of these lunches.
He didn't say that, Billy. He just, I'm joking.
He said,
that's right.
he said, I got something I got to do and I can't have lunch and you need to go deal with that. So I sent the vice president, we actually had an email, he invented it, and so we were using it in the White House.
So you just emailed instead of walking down there in person?
I said, you know what? The president would love to switch the lunch to brunch or breakfast or whatever, but it wasn't lunch was the important thing. 5 seconds later, Jack Quinn, who is his chief of staff, goes, Billy, I need to see you for a minute. I said, okay, I'll come to your office. He goes, no, not my office, the vice president's office. I went, oh my God. I go in there and the vice president says, sit down, Billy. And I said, yes, sir. And he goes, do you realize that I'm the vice president of the United States? I said, yes, sir, I do. And he goes, what do you think you're doing moving my lunch without discussing it with me? And I said, I am so sorry, Mr. Vice President. It's my fault. I made a mistake.
Everything's your fault.
I knew.
Always
I said I knew there was something else on the president's calendar, and I thought maybe this was a reasonable accommodation. He said, it is not a reasonable accommodation. We had a deal. We're having lunch every Wednesday. I go back to the Oval Office. Clinton is smiling like a Cheshire cat. He knew exactly what I was walking into, and he loved every second of it.
So did the lunch happen that week?
Lunch happened that week. I lost.
Yeah. I dealt with that myself several times. Yeah. well, let's see, we still have, 27, no, we still have some time. Talk a little bit about sort of, you did a little bit, but you have really seamlessly, like your leadership style. I mean, you clearly have a certain type of leadership style. You're very effusive, like you love being around people, that's obvious. Talk a little bit about how working in the White House, maybe how did that change your leadership style? And then when you went back out into your career in the public sector, like, did you change your sort of interactions or your leadership style? How did they differ from being in the White House or in the government and then going back out into the private sector?
You give me far too much credit. I think, again, much of this is just the way you're raised. I was blessed with a wonderful father who was a businessman who was always devoted to every employee that worked for him. Any personal tragedy, anything in their families, he was the first person to show up. He taught me that you have to hire good people and you have to love them. Even if you run a gigantic organization, I mean, the Department of Education was 5,000 people.
Right.
I was a founding board member of a public company. We had 67,000 employees. And culturally, you can't know 67,000 people, but you have to build a culture that they know honors their contribution to whatever it is that you're doing. And as I said, with respect to that day where, you're sending 5 guys to the Middle East, country by country, you got to pick the right people and you've got to give them responsibility and support them. The one thing that I did learn that I didn't know how to do was process voluminous amounts of information. At the Department of Education, I probably got 2,000 documents a day. We had to process, for every hour of the president's time, we had 10,000 requests.
Literally.
Many of those never made it to our purview, but, we had to create systems that could sift through just incredible amounts of stuff.
Internally and externally.
Yeah, and there was no artificial intelligence. There was no spreadsheet. There was just paper.
Right.
And you had to look at it.
Right. People weren't sending things like the email. This was all physical paper that
Physical paper.
Yellow envelopes. You scratch the name out. You put the next name on it. You know what
That's
I'm talking about.
exactly
Yeah.
right. And that skill, not a skill, that learned behavior has served me well in everything that I've done, whether it's business, politics, community service. It is, I'll put it another way, all of us know somebody who needs 100% of the information to make a decision. If they have 95% of it, they agonize over the last 5%. They just get stuck until they have every bit of it. There are other people, and I tried to teach myself to be in this batch of people. You need about 65% of the information to be right about 95% of the time. You got to live with being wrong some, and that's okay because we're all wrong and I'm wrong a bunch. But if you can get to a decision with 65% of the information and have a high likelihood of being right, you are light years faster than your competitor, or just in the White House, you're able to do your job where a bunch of people are relying on you to make decisions every single day that they've got to then act on.
My last question is, again, thinking back to your career, your leadership style, your ability to sort of maneuver into public service, back out into, the public sector. Do you have any advice for anyone here or watching online who may be considering a career in public service, which, as President Clinton always says, public service is a noble calling, and it seems that we may have forgotten about that in this day and age. But can you talk a little bit about why someone might consider a career in public service and how it can be as fulfilling as being in the private sector, if not more fulfilling?
Well, I don't know if you meant to use the word career. I think
Maybe I didn't.
The trick it's not trick. The fun thing is you do it here in Little Rock and in Arkansas, is to have a foot in both lives. I mean, if you are a responsible person, the public arena, whether it's community service, elected politics, appointed committees, whatever it is, it helps you, but both sides of that equation benefit. And so, I mean, a lot of people are afraid to go into public service because they think it's something else. It's not something else, it's a part of the whole. And you become better at everything you do by being part of both worlds, I think.
Well, Billy, this has been fascinating. I am excited to read this book. I am excited to promote this book to our audience here and to our online audience. It sounds thrilling, and I can't wait to obviously get the sequel as well. So I'm going to encourage you all to buy at least one, if not many books, and Billy will stay here till midnight if he has to sign them all.
I will say for the Audible readers, our reader is Grover Gardner, maybe a name. He's the second highest rated Audible reader of all time.
Wow, how did you do that? How'd you land him?
My co-author was the audiobook reviewer for the LA Times.
Okay.
And he picked Grover to read the book, and he's just got a magnificent voice.
Great. So we need to get both, this copy and we'll do the voice.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you all so much for being here. I also, before we close, just wanted to take a minute to thank the staff of the Clinton Foundation and the Clinton Library who pulled those fascinating documents out. I want to thank the volunteers who most likely welcomed you here and are such an integral part of our operations on a daily basis. And finally, but definitely not last but not least, I want to say a special word of thanks to our patrons and the donors here at the Clinton Center, which make these type of events possible. As many of you know, we're in the middle of an expansion campaign to build an expansion so we can even do more of these types of programs. And again, we are just grateful for your current and future support to allow us to have these type of opportunities. So thank you all. Have a good evening, and let's go buy some books.